every year, £1.25 billion is stolen from the NHS. That's money meant for doctors and nurses to run hospitals and to help us all when we fall ill. We're on the hunt with the crack teams of investigators.
This is a huge theft on a grand scale.
The treatment that he received hadn't happened. This is a fraud.
Tracking down the fraudsters, stealing public money.
They actually talk about, is what we're doing fraud? We are the villains, aren't we?
Locking them up and getting the cash back where it belongs.
Just under £1.5 million is going to be paid to some of the victims in our case.
Just over £23,000 back into the public purse.
The fraud squad is on the case. Today, an NHS locksmith sees pound signs when he's put in charge of a London hospital and pockets nearly £500,000.
To add a markup of 6,000% to an item that he was being charged to the NHS was no way justified.
And the nationwide scam that gave nursing students access to over £150,000.
She was at a party and there was somebody offering certificates for a fee. I think it was around £300.
First today, a building company lays a single pipe. They charge the NHS £345,000 for the work, for a pipe connected to absolutely nothing. It's the perfect scam until the investigators get on the case.
All that money, and he's wasted some of it on luxury holidays, cars, properties. He's benefited massively from defrauding the NHS.
Powys, the largest county in Wales and home to stretches of the beautiful Brecon Beacons. It's also home to 42-year-old Mark Eville, project manager with the Powys Health Board.
He was a likeable chap. He seemed to get on well with the people around him.
Eville worked successfully for the Health Board for over a year, managing budgets worth hundreds of thousands of pounds to provide vital NHS services. But his nice guy image doesn't wash with everyone. Someone has started to get suspicious. NHS counter-fraud specialist Cheryl Hill gets a tip-off.
The allegation came in and it said that 2 individuals within Powys Health Board were in the pockets of contractors, giving them contracts and getting payback.
It's a devastating allegation that people trusted to spend NHS money with care are in fact playing the system for their own financial gain.
The NHS is struggling for funding in any respect, and that anything that takes money away from that is a direct attack on patient care and patient services and needs to be dealt with as strongly as possible.
Cheryl gets straight on the case. It doesn't take long to discover something dodgy. Eville and a colleague have suspicious links with one particular company.
We established that Mark Eville and Robert Howells, who were employed as project managers at the Health Board, had been involved in a particular company by the name of George Morgan Limited. The inquiries identified that Mark Eville was the sole director of George Morgan Limited.
Eville had found a way of illegally making huge amounts of money. He'd enlisted his colleague Robert Howells to help him get lucrative NHS contracts awarded to his own company.
He was engaging with contractors on a genuine basis, but was submitting false invoices as part of George Morgan Limited. And obviously he was signing them off, but they were all under the guise of a genuine project.
It seems like a foolproof scam. Eville's charging the NHS for work, paying subcontractors a small amount, then taking the rest of the cash for himself.
This is some of the evidence we secured as part of the investigation, which was key, actually. So you can see here he's marked it for his own attention, and then he's actually authorised it for payment, and because he's controlling the whole process, it's been paid.
The con works like a dream for nearly 18 months. Then Evil spots the chance to make a lot of cash in one big hit.
The Mansion House project was the main project that Mark Evil oversaw during his time at the Health Board.
Mansion House was part of a local hospital. It was going to be sold, but first it needed a major refurb.
Mark Evil initially engaged with Western Power and Welsh Water, the utilities company, and they gave him quotes for electricity supply costing in the region of £30,000, and a water main supply would cost roughly £20,000.
But Evil doesn't get these reputable companies to do the work. Instead, he awards the contract to his own business at a huge markup.
George Morgan Limited had been paid £345,000 for this.
It's a massive amount of money, but the truly shocking part is still to come. The only work done was to lay a single pipe, connected to nothing at all. This is now turning into a full-scale criminal investigation. Showell brings in counter-fraud specialist David Rees.
I'd certainly place Mr. Evil in my top 10 of the con men I've come across. And my experience goes back over 46 years.
Together, Cheryl and David analyse every transaction involving Mark Evil. Their findings are alarming.
There's another one which, again, defies belief. He's charged the Health Board £24,000 because they haven't paid an invoice within 14 days. He signed it off himself, sent it off for payment, and it's gone into the George Morgan account. We then felt that we needed to move very quickly. So on the 17th of August 2015, we accompanied South Wales Police to Mark Evil's address. Mark Evil turned up about half hour later and was arrested by the police. We took him to Merthyr Tydfil police station and we interviewed him under caution.
He denied any wrongdoing.
But the case is about to take an unusual twist.
The name Paul Hewson came up on invoices. He said that Mr. Hewson did exist, that he'd paid him £10,000 to act administratively for the company, and that he'd since left the company and gone to live in Spain.
It was a bare-faced lie. In fact, Evil had borrowed the name from a famous pop star.
While I was doing my internet searches, every time I put Paul Hewson in, it was throwing up Bono from U2. And similarly, he also used the name of David Evans, who I subsequently found out through the internet searches was also The Edge from U2. I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen anything like it before, that somebody would be that blatant to use the names of pop stars.
Later, they discover exactly how Evil is spending his illegal NHS payout.
He had spent £92,000 on luxury items and living a grand lifestyle.
When we think of hospitals, we think of doctors and nurses, cleaners and porters. But there are hundreds of staff behind the scenes too. And our next case deals with a hospital locksmith. It's a highly responsible position requiring total trust. But this man flagrantly abused that trust and used his job as a license to print money. This is Andrew Taylor, an NHS locksmith who single-handedly ripped off a hospital for over £500,000, selfishly spending that cash on a flash new car and on a private education for his son.
It became quite shocking, not only that he'd managed to defraud the NHS of so much money, but the fact that it'd gone on for so long without anyone noticing.
Gavin Heaton is one of the investigators on the case.
Andrew Taylor was employed at Guy's Hospital here in South London. He was taken on originally as a carpenter, but from 2006 he was the sole locksmith responsible for the site.
After working in the job for over 5 years, Taylor earns a £20,000 salary and the respect of his colleagues.
He was afforded a lot of trust in his position because he was the only locksmith employed at the hospital, and it's a specialised field. He was required to carry out any of the duties within the trust that required locksmith services, replacing locks, but also sourcing the materials for anything to do with locks and padlocks. He was required to get the best price possible and to get the best deal for the NHS.
He appears to use one company exclusively, called Surety Security.
Surety Security were submitting quotes to the trust and ultimately invoices for the materials they delivered. It was all sorts of keys, locks, locksmith supplies, but also things like lockable cabinets, anything to do with the locksmith trade. Ultimately, I think it's 755 invoices.
And the hard-working, conscientious locksmith's choice of supplier is trusted by his workmates.
Andrew Taylor was always the first one into work, always the last one to go, and he was very rarely on leave.
But on one of the rare occasions when Taylor does decide to take a holiday, his colleagues notice a problem with the company Taylor is ordering his supplies from.
An urgent order came through. They needed some supplies and tried to contact Surety Security, and there was no answer on the number they had listed for the company.
It gets stranger. One of Taylor's colleagues goes online to try and find an alternative contact number and discovers something disturbing.
They come across a reference to Andrew Taylor once having been a director of this company, which they weren't aware of and he never declared.
It appears Andrew Taylor used to own Surety Security, and as Gavin and the investigators dig deeper, it looks like he still has a connection to the company.
They did some further checks, confirmed the person he was living with was the 100% shareholder and her son was the sole director of the company.
While sunning it up in Jamaica, Taylor couldn't have imagined what was taking place back home as counter-fraud investigators set about searching his workplace.
They recovered documentation and articles in there which clearly showed that the company was related to Taylor.
As the sole employee of Surety Security, unbelievably, Taylor is quoting himself for parts required at the hospital.
These are an example of some of the quotations that Andrew Taylor was preparing and sending into the trust in the name of Surety Security. So this was literally a one-man company, and yet he's addressing it to himself at the hospital.
As brazen as Taylor's dishonesty is, what Gavin finds on closer inspection is beyond belief.
These toilet locks, which are easily available, he was obtaining them for £11.82 and charging the trust £78.10 for the same items, which is a 560% markup.
And if you think Taylor's markup on locks is shocking,
He was buying in key blanks similar to this for about 17 pence from the wholesale supplier and then charging the hospital about £1.70 per item. He was ordering these in the hundreds as well, so it soon racked up. But to add a markup of 6,000% to an item that he was being charged to the NHS was extortionate and no way justified. And it wasn't just a small markup, he was really trying to get as much money as he could out of the NHS.
later, Taylor leaves a trail of clues that raise suspicions.
He was living a cash-rich lifestyle, which didn't fit the job he had.
There's no such thing as a straightforward fraud, and in the course of their investigations, the NHS team has seen it all.
The most outrageous fraud we've uncovered in NHS involved an optician who was claiming for glasses that they claimed to provide to patients when they weren't providing any glasses at all. So it was absolutely astonishing. It was a huge fraud. And in fact, one patient had 20/20 vision.
I did one a few years back where it was one couple had 28 separate identities they were using to claim various benefits. About 150 false children.
Another lady who was employed as a carer. She had 4 different names and kept changing her name to avoid detection, to nurses and other staff then who have an addiction to controlled drugs.
In all of the time that I've been investigating dental fraud, I've seen everything from a high-speed car chase to a dentist who filed down children's teeth into the shape of fangs, to just unspeakable hygiene practices like washing stock trays for dentures in a bucket.
Nursing pioneer Florence Nightingale once said, "I attribute my success to this. I never gave or took any excuse." Her honest and hard-working attitude lives on in modern British nursing. But sadly, a small minority are happy to take shocking shortcuts to cheat their way into getting a job. Next, we have the story of a nationwide scam. People using bogus qualifications to fake their way onto nursing courses, taking places away from those who truly deserve them, and taking £150,000 out of the NHS. The investigation kicks off in 2012, when local counter-fraud specialist Eleni Gill receives a call from Health Education England. They think they've spotted a scam. People applying for nursing courses submitting fake exam certificates.
What was discovered was there were many files that had suspicious-looking GCSE or O-level certificates, suggesting that they'd fraudulently provided these certificates in order to get onto the course and gain access to this NHS money.
Was this a deliberate fraud as a way of getting cash from the NHS? And just how widespread was the con? Eleni set out to examine all of the suspects' certificates.
For this case, my team and I must have visited over a dozen universities nationally around the country.
As Eleni begins collecting the evidence, she's shocked by the sheer amount of money the students are receiving.
Most cases, an average of about 50k was obtained by each individual throughout their duration of studies.
Eleni's investigations turn up an astonishing 21 certificates, which she thinks could be fraudulent. That's 21 people claiming NHS money who have no right to it. So she turns detective. How can she prove the certificates are fakes?
I'm on my way to Cambridge International Examinations to meet with Mike Bowerman, who's an expert on fraudulent certificates, to get some information from him. Have a look at these.
As part of the exam board that awards certificates, Mike and his team know better than anyone how to spot a fake.
These certificates here look as if they've been laser printed, which is not a technology that was available, certainly to us, at the time of these examinations.
And one certificate stands out for the wrong reasons.
Look at that border. I've never seen that before.
No, these documents are statements of results. Now, we have samples. None of the statements of results that we would issue to candidates would have this style of border.
It's clearly a fake. Based on her bogus qualifications, the student got a place studying nursing at Anglia Ruskin University and received £12,000 in fees and bursaries. She never even completed the course. On the 24th of May 2016, the student appears at Cambridge Crown Court. She pleads guilty to 5 counts of fraud, is handed 200 hours of community service and ordered to pay back £1,000. But Eleni's only just begun. She's straight on to her next case, the certificate of Zimbabwean Olivia Mpofu, married name Tetina.
The tuition fees paid by the NHS for her to study as a nurse were £50,000. So it's quite a large amount of money from the NHS.
But does Tetina have the qualifications needed to lawfully receive £50,000 of NHS money? It's not long before Mike's eagle eye spots cracks in her certificate.
We've got the historical record for the candidates' results for that year. What we're looking for is the centre number, Z1235, and the candidate number, which is candidate number 69. So by scanning through these records, we find candidate number 69. You can see on the main certificate the centre number for the particular school where this candidate supposedly took these exams is shown as Z1235. Well, that's okay. It's a genuine Zimbabwean centre. However, when we come across to the left-hand side of the transcript, we're shown a totally different name to the one that's printed on the certificate, and we also have a totally different school to the one that's printed on the certificate. So the only conclusion we can draw is that it was fraudulently produced.
The more Mike inspects the certificate, the dodgier it looks.
We can see that their original transcript, this student took 10 subjects, and we only have 6 showing on the certificate. So that means there's a problem.
Tetina's brought in for interview. She admits she doesn't have the right qualifications to train to be a nurse. And she spills the beans on how she got her fake certificate.
She did state that she was at a party and there was somebody there offering certificates to people for a fee. I think it was around £300. That was what was quite scary as to how easy it was for people to obtain these certificates if they want them.
£300 for a fake certificate in return for £50,000 of NHS cash. The case against Tetina is prepared for her appearance at Luton Crown Court. But when the day arrives, she's nowhere to be seen. A warrant is put out for her arrest and airports are alerted. It takes 8 months, but finally she's caught at Heathrow, trying to leave the country.
She was there arrested and she was taken straight to court. She was found guilty of fraud and she was asked to repay all the money, which was around 50k, and ordered to carry out 200 hours of community service. She was also issued a curfew from 7 till 7.
One more case closed. But with so many certificates still in need of analysis, Eleni and Mike press on with their investigation. Next up is University of Hertfordshire student Monica Sengu.
Look at this, the spelling's all wrong there.
You have English language instead of language.
Yeah, mathematics.
Mike and Eleni are convinced they're looking at another fake certificate. Sengu is brought in for questioning. But this time, there's no admission of guilt.
She denied all allegations of fraud and said that she didn't realise that the certificate was fraudulent if it was, and to her belief it was authentic.
But with over £58,000 of NHS money to her name, the investigators aren't just taking her word for it. She's called in for a fitness to practice hearing at the Nursing and Midwifery Council. But Sengu tries to wriggle her way out of trouble.
Her solicitor sent through further documentation, including another certificate, which she claimed was her actual results, which varied from the original certificate submitted to the university.
2 certificates, 2 different sets of exam results. Is either genuine?
Firstly, it's laminated, and I believe that makes the certificate invalid. And I think a lot of the reason the candidates do laminate these certificates is because it's harder to tell if they're authentic or not.
Yes, correct, that's right.
Very
Yes.
suspicious.
And this is the original. On here, we have name of school, it's not here. Conditions of issue, not here. So that would raise alarm bells with me as well.
I was very surprised that she'd actually produced a further fake document. When you're producing 2 documents that are false, I think then it's harder to believe her innocence.
With Sengu refusing to admit her guilt, Eleni gathers the evidence she needs to take Sengu to court. The jury takes just 40 minutes to find her guilty of fraud. She's sentenced to 20 months in prison, suspended for 2 years, plus 200 hours of community service. Eleni has successfully investigated 5 other nurses. Now her work is finally drawing to a close.
The 2 remaining nurses are due to attend their fitness to practice hearing in the Nursing Midwifery Council in this building here in London, Aldwych. Based on the previous 6 hearings that took place here, the subjects were struck off the nursing register, so I'm quite hopeful that we'll have the same outcome.
During this 4-year investigation, 21 people were found to have got on training courses using fake certificates. Between them, they claimed £174,000 of NHS money. So far, 8 people have been struck off and 4 have got criminal convictions. Fraud cases can range from £2,000 pension scams up to £1 million conspiracies. And it's these big buck cases that investigators always remember.
The largest case I think I've investigated was a £1.2 million fraud, which involved a large number of false identities.
One case I worked on, we stopped about £2.5 million worth of contractual payments being given to these dentists every year, so it was huge.
The biggest amount that we've got back into the public purse, into the NHS, was quite a recent case. It was just under £60,000, and that money then was paid back in full.
We dealt with a head of financial accounting within 2 former primary care trusts, diverted monies directly from primary care trusts into his own bank accounts that he managed, and managed to embezzle and steal and defraud the NHS of in excess of £2 million. It's an extraordinary level of fraud. We then went on as an organisation to recover the entirety of the money that he stole from the NHS.
In Wales, an insider tip-off has put investigators on the trail of a manager who's scamming hundreds of thousands of pounds from the NHS.
These are some of the things we've recovered from Mark Evil's house during the course of the search. In particular, there's a Breitling watch, which I believe is worth in excess of £5,000, together with a tag watch, again, luxury item, which we think is about £5,000. And we also found a yacht brochure, which we know that he travelled to Dubai on business class with his partner and stayed in a 5-star hotel. He had spent £197,000 on the purchases of property, which he subsequently put into his parents' name. So you can see clearly he's had quite an extravagant lifestyle off the back of the NHS fraud that he's committed. They're making some arrangements, but nothing specific.
Cheryl Hill is in charge of the investigation, working with counter-fraud specialist David Rees. The deeper they look, the more they find.
Mark Evil wasn't working in isolation with regards to fraud. He'd also involved Robert Howells and Michael Cope.
Robert Howells is a project manager. Michael Cope, an estate manager. Both work with Evil. They're approving bids by George Morgan Limited, knowing this is Evil's private company.
Their true involvement really came to light as a result of analysis of text messages.
The big breakthrough comes from Evil's mobile phone. It had been seized when he was arrested, and the messages they find are an investigator's dream.
We could see from the text messages that Robert Howells had received £1,000 in cash through his front door in December 14.
It later emerged that he received a Ford Focus car as well.
Then Michael Cope had received a cheque for £500, again through his front door. There's a text message from Michael Cope to Mark Evil saying, "Mark, I've just come through the door, I'm lost for words, thank you so much." And Evil then responds by saying, "That's fine, but if you could forward all works to George Morgan." Then literally within hours of receiving the money through the door, he started sending requests for quotations to George Morgan Limited for construction works for various projects that were going on. In one instance, he submitted an invoice to the Health Board for £55,000.
But on his biggest scam, the Mansion House Hospital project, Evil had really ramped up his fraud.
Our inquiries subsequently found out that Mark Evil had paid a local construction firm £45,000 to put this pipe in the ground, which wasn't connected to any water main or anything, but then charged the Health Board £345,000 for works that hadn't been completed.
The Mansion House scam took Evil's total fraud to a whopping £822,000 of NHS funds.
By defrauding the health board, it's enabled him to live a lifestyle that was far in excess of what his normal salary would have brought to him.
It then cost the NHS a further £600,000 to fix the dodgy building work done by George Morgan Limited. That brought the total cost of the fraud to almost £1.5 million.
In January 2018, the CPS issued charges against Evil, Howells and Cope.
Evil and Howells were charged with money laundering and fraud offences, and Cope with fraud. All three pleaded not guilty, so a trial date was set for October of that year.
On the second day of the trial, when the barrister clearly laid out what had happened, it got to the stage where even Evil realised the extent of what he'd done, and he subsequently pleaded guilty, as did Robert Howells.
Estate manager Michael Cope maintained his not guilty plea, but after 2.5 weeks, the jury found him guilty of fraud and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Howells was also found guilty of fraud and got a 4-year term. Evil was found guilty of transferring criminal property, fraud and perverting the course of justice. He was sentenced to 7 years.
We'll apply for compensation. We should recover something in the region of £500,000.
In this case, it was clearly criminal, and we set out from the start to try and prove it and get him convicted, which we did.
The NHS often uses outside companies for things like large building projects or, as in our next case, specialist training for its staff. There are strict rules to make sure these kinds of deals are all above board. But next up, 2 highly respected NHS employees decide not to play by those rules. They award their own company's NHS work. They overcharge and underdeliver, ultimately abusing their positions and ripping off the NHS of over £150,000. Sandwell Primary Care Trust, Birmingham. An invoice is raised by a senior mental health manager. A colleague smells a rat and tips off the NHS Counter-Fraud Authority. David Hall, a national investigator, is on the case.
Well, the fact that it was being paid to a company related to the subject who was in the position to authorise the invoice, a clear conflict of interests, and that it could be deemed to be bribery or corruption.
2 words guaranteed to get investigators fired up. David and his team get to work.
It's a question of fact-finding to sort of get as much information as possible to determine whether the facts that are being presented indicate whether there is any criminality.
He looks first at the manager in question, Lisa Hill.
Lisa Hill was a senior manager in the team and was in a position of significant trust. She had the ability to authorise high-value invoices.
But Hill isn't the only one at Sandwell Primary Care Trust who sits on the charity's board. Her colleague, Dr. Ian Walton, is listed as a director, and neither has told the NHS Trust.
Dr. Ian Walton was the clinical lead for mental health. He was held in some esteem in that position. There was significant trust placed in a doctor. There's a great belief in those that are working in the NHS that they have the patients and the people that come to them at heart.
As the case unfolds, it becomes clear that Walton and Hill have other joint interests too. They're also both directors of Walton Hill Associates, offering training to GPs and nursing staff. David's investigators start looking into how the 2 companies are connected, and the results are troubling.
The charitable trust would sometimes subcontract, for want of a better term, to Walton Hill Associates, which in effect was just Walton and Hill delivering the training themselves.
It looks as though Hill and Walton are awarding NHS contracts for training to their own charity and their own private company. And it's a lucrative fraud, earning them over £150,000. But to prove it, David and his team need hard evidence.
We approached the police to organise warrants to be searched at the home address of the subject, which enabled us to seize IT equipment and documents.
Hill and Walton are both suspended from their NHS jobs. Their homes and offices are searched.
The IT equipment is taken to the forensic computer unit. That would give access to our own investigators to search through using search terms to find if there was anything of evidential value.
As they examine the computer hard drives, one piece of evidence stands out.
They found an invoice which had been submitted for the payment of monies, and they found emails between the subject and the charitable concern.
The forensic search reveals more shocking finds, this time with the training the pair provided through Walton Hill Associates.
They'd submitted invoices for training events, some of which had not occurred or had not occurred at the price at which they were submitting. It is a question of opportunity and greed.
Armed with evidence that proves they failed to declare their conflict of interest and profited to the tune of £150,000, investigators bring them both in for questioning.
They are conducting interviews and then cross-checking that against what we know as fact from either witnesses or material that is being provided by the NHS, and indeed what is being found within the computers.
Their answers don't add up, and they're charged with fraud at Birmingham Crown Court.
At court, the defendants, after some deliberation, pleaded guilty to the counts.
Both Hill and Walton are given 2-year suspended prison sentences and ordered to complete 200 hours of community work. They're also told to repay the £150,000 back to the NHS.
Clearly, when people are in positions of trust and in seniority, they're getting paid well to do a job to start with. If they decide to then conduct dishonest designs to benefit themselves, it's really wrong. You know, I mean, the money is intended for the good of the patients and the use of the NHS.
In closing, the judge said Hill and Walton had worked tirelessly for the public good for many years, but said their behaviour could not help but erode public confidence in the NHS.
People like Walton Hill need to be stopped. Hopefully, the prosecution of people in positions of trust like that sends a message to those that may consider taking the opportunity when it presents itself.
NHS investigators are on the trail of a locksmith who's been trusted with the security of a London hospital. It turns out he's been using his position to scam the NHS out of over £500,000. As part of his investigation, Gavin is going through all Andrew Taylor's financial records, scouring them for evidence of the fraud.
It quickly became clear that he was spending a lot more money than he should have been able to legitimately do through the employment he had with the NHS. He was taking home about £1,700 a month, and yet when we checked his bank accounts, his son's school fees were £1,300 a month. He was sending his child to a private school. His outgoings were far outstripped what he should have been legitimately earning. He also purchased a car in the company name. I think that was about £27,000. It was on finance. This is a photograph of Mr. Taylor and his family collecting his brand new car from the dealers, bought in the name of Surety Security. He looks rather pleased with himself.
To Gavin, one thing is clear.
He was living a cash-rich lifestyle, which didn't fit the job he had.
When Andrew Taylor returns from his holiday, he knows he's been rumbled. He immediately resigns from Guy's Hospital and dissolves his company, Surety Security. Gavin, accompanied by the police, goes to Taylor's home. He's not there, but a few days later arrives at Gavin's office to be interviewed.
He refused to answer any questions, but a prepared statement was provided by his solicitor where he basically blamed it all on another man, a man called Mark Watson, who he said set up the company. He never provided any details of who this man was, where he lived. The best he could do was he was a man, and that was the best description that he could give.
Gavin is determined to get to the bottom of it and discover the true scale of Andrew Taylor's fraud.
Through this fraud, he ripped off the trust for practically £600,000.
With a shocking £500,000 of NHS money at stake, Taylor is brought back for a second interview. And that's when things take a bizarre turn.
His solicitor sent in a second prepared statement, basically saying that his first one was not correct and that he'd lied in his first prepared statement and that he'd exaggerated the role of this Mark Watson. I've never had it where you've had a prepared statement and then had one immediately after to say that the first one was incorrect and that I'd lied in it. It was unusual to say the least, but quite useful for us.
Andrew Taylor's desperate attempt to wheedle out of the accusations he's facing fails. He's charged with fraud by abuse of position and summoned to Inner London Crown Court.
He pleaded not guilty, but at the trial, in his cross-examination, there were so many flaws in his story and so many things wrong with the explanations he was giving. There was no doubt at all in my mind that he was guilty.
But Taylor doesn't give up without a fight.
He was trying to argue that he'd done something to each one of these items to warrant the markup. So he was saying that he'd made them more secure and added stuff to them, taken stuff away. But our barrister cross-examined him on this and asked him what possible value he could have added to a box of key tags that he'd marked up by about 500%, or a length of chain that he'd marked up by 1,000%. So yeah, that story didn't stand up in court at all.
And what about the elusive Mark Watson?
During the trial, he was questioned about Mark Watson. The judge decided after he'd been found guilty that he didn't believe any of his evidence and there was no Mark Watson and he'd been the architect of the fraud from the start.
On the 26th of March 2018, Taylor is found guilty and sentenced to 6 years in prison.
I think the reasons for him committing this crime was purely greed. A lot of people, I think, they wouldn't commit a crime until they'd seen a flaw in the system. But once he'd seen it and he'd realised he could get away with it, then greed was the driving factor behind this, and he was just making lots and lots of money, so he exploited it as much as he possibly could.
Across the country, investigators are working tirelessly to protect our NHS from the ruthless criminals who want to line their own pockets on public money.
And Fraud Squad NHS is back same time tomorrow. Up next, a Nottingham property which comes with a big added bonus. Find out what with Homes Under the Hammer.